What if the person you trust the most is the one whispering your undoing when you're not around? What if the laughter that echoes in your ears is laced with venom you haven't yet tasted? Evil doesn't always wear horns or crawl out of nightmares. Sometimes it dresses itself in warmth, calls you family, and looks you in the eye when it lies. Sometimes it shows up with a casserole and a compliment and still manages to poison your joy behind closed doors. You start to feel it before you name it, an itch in your soul, a tightening in your chest when they enter the room. It's subtle, almost polite, the way darkness pretends to be light when it wants to get close enough to feed. And the worst part is, you doubt yourself first before you ever doubt them. You catch the way they look when your dreams come true, a flicker of something cold in their eyes, quickly masked by a smile too wide to trust. They cheer for you with their mouths while their hearts plot your descent. They pretend to pour into you, but you always leave emptier. These people sit at your table and eat your food, but they are never truly full, because what they hunger for is your light. And the more you shine, the more they squint and criticize. But they wrap it in love, don't they? In jokes, in sarcasm, in just being honest. So you swallow your discomfort and call it loyalty, when really you're digesting slow betrayal. Evil doesn't always push, it leans in. It flatters, it offers help with a hook in its hand, and the closer it gets, the harder it is to breathe. You start apologizing for your intuition. You start explaining your boundaries. You start second-guessing your gut. Because when evil energy sits in the body of someone you once trusted, it's not just them you have to confront. It's the version of you that needed their approval to feel safe. And so you shrink, you rationalize, you hold on tighter, but what you're really holding is the serpent that learned how to smile. And maybe it's not even what they do, but how you feel after every interaction. Tired, smaller, confused, diminished. You try to convince yourself it's just your mood, your own negativity, but the truth is, energy doesn't lie. They do. And the longer you stay, the more you forget the sound of your own inner voice. It's a soul-level erosion. A slow rot. And until you call it what it is, evil masked as loyalty, as closeness, as familiarity, you'll keep dancing in the fire thinking you're just imagining the burn. But that heat, that's your warning. That smile, that's the mask. And deep beneath it the serpent waits, not with fangs bared, but with your trust in its hands. It begins when you start editing yourself before you speak, not out of respect, but fear. Fear of how they'll twist your words, fear of the backlash wrapped in a joke, fear of being misunderstood on purpose. You tell yourself you're being careful, mature, wise, but what you're really doing is shrinking, contorting, disappearing in slow motion, because loyalty, when corrupted, becomes a prison dressed in devotion. You're told to keep the peace, to not rock the boat, to remember all they've done for you. But peace that cost your soul isn't peace, it's submission. And boats that can't handle truth deserve to sink. They remind you of your past like it's a weapon. They hold the receipts of every mistake, every weakness, and call it love. You're supposed to feel grateful for their presence, but instead you feel indebted. And debt in the wrong hands becomes a leash. You think you owe them your silence, your availability, your constant yes. You don't. But evil energy thrives in the currency of guilt. It masquerades as loyalty, but it's a contract signed in emotional blood. And you didn't even realize you were bleeding until you tried to walk away and felt the weight of the chains disguised as love. You begin to question if you're overreacting, if maybe you're the problem. That's the trick of evil energy. It makes you believe your suffering is noble, that staying is strength, that enduring is love. But love shouldn't suffocate. Love shouldn't require you to abandon yourself. And yet here you are, trying to make them comfortable in a room that's killing your spirit. You explain, you defend, you try to be palatable. But what you're really doing is negotiating with a cage, hoping it'll become a home. It won't. A gilded cage is still a prison, no matter how familiar the bars. The moment you realize that your loyalty has become a tool against you is the moment your awakening begins. You're not crazy for noticing the patterns. You're not weak for wanting peace. You're not disloyal for wanting to breathe again. Evil energy will always try to keep you bound because your freedom threatens its control, so it plays nice, plays victim, plays history like a hymn you're supposed to worship. But you don't owe your soul to anyone who trades in manipulation. Let that false loyalty rot, because the moment you begin to love yourself louder than you fear their reaction, the cage starts to crack and you start to remember what it feels like to be free. You know the feeling, that strange emptiness after being around them. You walked in with light, but you leave with shadows clinging to your back, and still you question yourself. Was it something I said? Was I too much, too little, too sensitive? But deep down, your soul knows, because every time you pour into them, they drink like a bottomless well and never once ask if you're running dry. They cry on your shoulder, complain in your ear, demand your energy like it's their right. And when you finally whisper a need of your own, they vanish, or worse, accuse you of selfishness. This isn't love. This is extraction. They call it connection, but it's dependency. They call it closeness, but it's consumption. And the more you give, the more they take. You start feeling guilty for setting boundaries, ashamed for needing space. You convince yourself that being a good friend means being a doormat. But this isn't friendship. This is spiritual leeching. It's not that they can't survive without you. It's that they don't want to do the inner work they've dumped on your doorstep. And you've become their emotional landfill, their unpaid therapist, their mirror, their container, their escape hatch. But who holds you when you collapse? Evil energy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it weeps. Sometimes it masks itself in helplessness. But don't be fooled. The most dangerous evil isn't loud. It's needy. It finds your compassion and weaponizes it. It takes your softness and turns it into servitude. And the longer you stay in this silent transaction, the more you forget that love is supposed to be mutual. That connection is supposed to lift, not deplete. That being there for someone doesn't mean erasing yourself for their comfort. This is not empathy. This is emotional enslavement dressed up as loyalty. You are allowed to walk away from people who feed off your pain and call it intimacy. You are allowed to reclaim your energy, your time, your voice. You are allowed to stop bleeding just to prove your worth. Because real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real love doesn't drain you and call it devotion. Evil energy will cry when you leave, not because it loves you, but because it lost its source. But you will rise lighter, stronger, whole, and the silence that follows their absence will finally sound like peace, not loneliness. Peace. There's a shift you can't explain, the way your spirit contracts around them. You enter the room full of dreams, clarity, purpose, and within minutes, you forget why you believed in yourself at all. They don't need to say much. Sometimes it's the tone, the timing, the look, the passive-aggressive silence, or the carefully worded doubt disguised as advice. It's not what they say, it's how it lands. It lands like a curse, like a cold hand on the back of your neck, and you start to notice a pattern. Around them, your greatness feels like a threat, not a celebration. You begin to fold your wings in their presence just to make them comfortable. At first, you think you're being humble, that you're just trying not to brag. But humility doesn't feel like fear. Humility doesn't make your heart race when you speak your truth. What you're feeling is suppression. Their energy is a mirror, but not the kind that reflects. It distorts. It shows you a smaller, dimmer version of yourself and asks you to believe that's who you are. And the more you internalize it, the more you become it. Your voice trembles. Your power hides. Your intuition gets quieter. And all the while, they sit calmly, feeding off the control they've silently asserted. They don't need to shout to dominate. All they have to do is exist in the space with that unspoken expectation. Stay small around me. Evil energy doesn't always aim to destroy. It aims to shrink. It clips your wings one feather at a time, under the guise of concern, tradition, or subtle competition. And the more you shrink, the more they praise your maturity, your self-awareness, your growth. But it's not growth if it's rooted in fear. It's not maturity if it means abandoning your truth. And it's not self-awareness if the voice in your head sounds more like their judgment than your soul. You were never meant to feel small in the presence of someone who claims to love you. You were never meant to cage your radiance to soothe someone else's insecurity. Start paying attention to how your body reacts in their presence. Do you breathe deeper or do you hold your breath? Do you speak freely, or do you scan their face for approval? That's your signal. That's your truth. Because true connection feels like expansion, like oxygen, like being seen without fear. And when you find yourself constantly dimming your light to be palatable, understand this. It is not your job to shrink for anyone's comfort, especially not those who say they care. Evil energy thrives where your power is buried, so dig it up, dust it off, stand tall again, because the moment you stop shrinking is the moment their illusion starts to break. You start to speak your truth, and suddenly you're the villain, the ungrateful one, the dramatic one. You bring up how something made you feel, and they twist it so artfully, you end up apologizing for feeling anything at all. This is not conflict. This is distortion. This is emotional warfare dressed as dialogue. They don't want clarity. They want control. And gaslighting isn't just lying. It's rewriting reality. It's turning your intuition into a liability. It's planting seeds of doubt so deep in your mind that you begin to mistrust your own memory, your own voice, your own soul. It's spiritual abuse wearing the robes of reason. They'll say, that's not what happened. Even when your bones remember, they'll ask, why are you so sensitive, after slicing you with precision? They'll swear you're overreacting when all you've done is name the thing they hoped would stay buried. They don't want reconciliation. They want you confused, because a confused mind is easier to manipulate. They need you uncertain so they can anchor themselves as your compass, but they're not guiding you. They're steering you away from yourself, and they're good at it. So good, in fact, that you start to wonder if you are the toxic one, if you are broken, if maybe silence would have been safer than the truth. Evil energy uses gaslighting like scripture. It quotes your pain back to you with holy confidence, twisting the verses to fit its agenda. And when that doesn't work, it plays the victim. It cries, it begs, it turns your boundaries into betrayal. Suddenly, your no becomes cruelty, your clarity becomes punishment, and all the while, you're the one doing the emotional labor to keep the peace. You're the one rewording your truth, trying to say it nicer, trying not to be too much. But truth doesn't need permission, and your feelings are not up for debate. You owe no one an explanation for your inner knowing. The moment you feel like you have to justify your truth in order to be loved is the moment you're no longer safe. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not energetically. Gaslighting is soul erosion. It's a slow death by doubt, and those who practice it will always wrap their manipulation in concern, their guilt trips in kindness. But you don't need to keep swallowing poison just because it's served with a smile. Your memory is not flawed. Your feelings are not too much. Your truth is not a threat. It is a sword, and it's time you remembered how to wield it, not to hurt, but to cut through the fog they've built around your brilliance. They offer advice before you ask, solutions to problems they barely understand, always one step ahead with what you should do, how you ought to feel, who you need to become. And at first, it feels like care, like love wearing armor, like protection dressed in wisdom. But over time, you notice the undercurrent, the subtle hierarchy, the way their help comes with strings, expectations, control. It isn't offered freely, it's laced with judgment. And soon, their guidance becomes a script you're supposed to follow, deviate, and the mask slips. You see the shadow behind their smile, the offense they take when you choose your own path. There's a power play hidden in their concern, because it's not really about you, it's about their comfort, their image, their need to feel necessary. And when you grow in a direction they didn't plant, when you evolve beyond the role they cast you in, they can't celebrate it. Instead, they question it. They undermine it. They find cracks in your transformation and dig, because your healing makes them irrelevant. And for someone who's built their identity on being the helper, that's a threat. They don't want you whole. They want you dependent. Not because they're evil in the cartoonish sense, but because control is their way of feeling safe. Evil energy doesn't always look like malice. Sometimes it hides in misplaced martyrdom, in people who use help as currency, who keep track of what they've done for you and hold it like collateral against your freedom. And when you push back even gently, they accuse you of betrayal. After everything I've done for you becomes the anthem of their wounded pride. But real love doesn't count favors. Real support empowers you to think for yourself, even if that means making mistakes. Because love isn't about control, it's about freedom. And anything that chains your spirit in the name of guidance is not love. It's spiritual entrapment. You are not ungrateful for setting boundaries. You are not disloyal for trusting your own path. You are not selfish for refusing to play the role they wrote for you. You are waking up. You are unhooking yourself from the narrative where you must shrink to be supported, from the dynamic where your autonomy is seen as rebellion. You can honor what they gave without being bound by it. You can say thank you and still walk away. Because help that comes with ownership is not help, it's control. And you were never meant to be someone's project. You were born to be free, even if that freedom offends the shadow they tried to hide behind their good intentions. It took you years to admit it, but you were never truly safe with them. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not energetically. Sure, you shared memories, laughed together, maybe even cried. But deep down, beneath the surface of your connection, there was always a warning bell ringing in your soul. You just didn't know how to name it. They didn't hit you, scream at you, or threaten you outright. Their weapon was subtler. They stabbed you with silence, with withdrawal, with conditional affection. One moment you were golden, adored, the center of their world. The next, you were too much, too distant, too sensitive. And so, you learned to mold yourself to stay in their good graces. You started walking on eggshells, not because they were volatile, but because their love had terms and conditions, and you weren't sure what those conditions were, only that if you stepped out of line, the warmth disappeared. That kind of instability does something to you. It trains you to ignore your gut, to prioritize their comfort, to chase approval like oxygen. And it becomes a cycle, one where you keep showing up, trying to earn love that should have never required proof. You called it love, but now you know better. It was fear, it was survival, it was the slow erasure of your true self in the name of keeping peace. You were never safe because their affection had a sharp edge. You could feel the judgment just beneath their compliments, the competition hidden in their encouragement, the resentment buried inside their support. They didn't want you to fail, but they didn't want you to outgrow them either. So they cheered with one hand and pulled you back with the other. They disguised jealousy as concern, control as wisdom. Their wounds were disguised as wisdom, their bitterness cloaked in fake empathy, and you swallowed it all because they were family, your person, the one who's always been there. But presence doesn't equal safety. History doesn't equal trust. Familiarity doesn't equal love. You always left their presence feeling a little less alive, like something in you had been tampered with, your energy clouded, your clarity gone. You'd find yourself second-guessing things that had felt solid just hours before. That's the mark of evil energy. It doesn't destroy you outright. It distorts you. It wraps its toxicity in nostalgia, in guilt, in emotional IOUs, and it keeps you tethered, not through chains, but through obligation. You think leaving would make you heartless, but staying is what's actually killing you, slowly, quietly, invisibly. You start to remember the times they exposed your secrets as punchlines, laughed at your pain, or withheld affection to make a point. You recall the accidental betrayals, the whispered criticisms in front of others, the way your wins were always downplayed or redirected. And still you stayed. You excused it. You spiritualized it. You told yourself they were wounded, that their trauma wasn't their fault. But your compassion became your cage, and evil energy knows how to exploit a soft heart. It doesn't care about your empathy. It counts on it. Because as long as you keep giving the benefit of the doubt, it can keep feeding off your light without consequence. There is a kind of evil that thrives on proximity. It needs to be close to your power to feel alive. It needs access, intimacy, vulnerability. And once it has it, it doesn't nurture you, it devours you, not all at once, just enough to keep you doubting, just enough to keep you tired, just enough to make you feel like you're the problem. But the truth is, you were never the problem. You were just too open, too loyal, too trusting. You mistook shared history for shared spirit. But not everyone who walks with you walks in truth, and not everyone who says I love you actually wants what's best for your soul. You were never safe with them, not because you were weak, but because your spirit was strong, because you carried light, because you held a mirror, and mirrors make demons uncomfortable, so they tried to break you before you ever saw your full reflection. But here you are, still standing, still awakening, still peeling back the layers of their illusion. And now you see it clearly. Safety is not built on obligation. Love is not supposed to make you feel small, and peace should never come at the cost of your voice. You were never safe with them, but you are finally safe with yourself, and that's where your healing begins. You hesitate at the edge of goodbye, the edge of separation, the edge of finally choosing yourself, and it's terrifying, not because you don't know it's right, but because of how much you've tolerated in the name of love. You've convinced yourself that leaving would make you cold, ungrateful, even cruel. But it's not cruelty to walk away from those who feast on your energy and call it companionship. It's not betrayal to protect your peace from those who only showed up when they needed a place to unload. The ones who fed on you never asked how you were really doing. They just assumed you'd always be there to absorb them. You start to realize that love without mutual care is just possession. That emotional safety is not a luxury, it's a requirement. And now your body won't let you stay numb anymore. It flinches when their name lights up your phone. It tightens when they enter the room. Your silence used to be survival, but now it's become a slow death, and the truth is rising like a tide. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. You cannot become your full self in the presence of people who only accept the version of you that serves them. Their love had rules, their connection had costs, and your soul has started keeping the receipts. So you pack your spirit quietly, without fanfare, not out of bitterness but out of sacred necessity. You stop explaining, you stop justifying, you stop playing small for their comfort. Because this is not about convincing them to see your worth. It's about remembering it for yourself, and you'll cry, you'll mourn. Not just them, but the you who tolerated them. The you who bent over backward just to stay in their good graces. That version of you didn't know yet what boundaries were. That version of you thought love meant endurance. That version of you was surviving. But this version is ready to live. And living means letting go, even if they don't understand, even if they twist your absence into a story that makes you the villain. Let them. You don't need to defend your awakening to those committed to their sleep. You don't need to apologize for no longer being their emotional buffet. And you certainly don't need to feel guilty for saying, enough. You were not put here to be consumed. You were not born to be a container for other people's wounds. You were born to rise, to shine, to feel light in your body and clarity in your chest. And leaving them is the first inhale after years of holding your breath. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it hurts. But you will find peace in the spaces they once occupied. You will feel freedom in the silence they used to fill with noise. And that ache in your heart, that's just the echo of your old self dissolving. Let it dissolve. Let the version of you who needed to be needed finally rest. Because the truth is, the people who feed on you will never be satisfied. But you are learning how to feed yourself. And that, finally, is love. Real, unconditional, sacred love for the person you are when you're no longer someone else's meal. The moment you choose yourself, the masks begin to fall. The smiles crack. The silence thickens. And suddenly, those who once claimed to love you have questions in their eyes and venom in their words. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did something sacred. You broke the contract they never said out loud. Stay small so I can stay comfortable. Stay confused so I can stay in control. Stay loyal to my wounds so I don't have to face them. But you didn't stay. You left. You burned the script. You started speaking the language of freedom, and freedom sounds like betrayal to those who only know how to relate through control. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. They'll say you're distant, cold, hard, and maybe in their world you are. Because in their world, warmth meant access, kindness meant compliance, and love meant sacrifice. But you've redefined it. You've learned that love without respect is a hollow performance, that kindness without boundaries is self-erasure, that warmth without discernment is an open door to your own destruction. And now every time you choose silence over reaction, space over chaos, truth over comfort, you shine. And that light, it stings their eyes, because your freedom reveals their bondage. Your clarity unmasks their confusion. Your healing becomes the mirror they've spent years avoiding. You will lose people. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself. You'll walk away from circles where gossip was disguised as bonding, where envy dressed up as support, where checking in was just surveillance with a smile. And it will feel lonely at first, quiet, strange. But that silence is holy. That emptiness is sacred. It's the clearing of a field before something new can grow. And in that space, you'll start to feel something you haven't in years. Yourself. Unfiltered, undiluted, unapologetic. You'll remember who you were before you were taught to fear your own brilliance, before you were conditioned to confuse love with pain. They will talk, they will twist, they will throw stones from the shadows, but let them. That's what darkness does when it's cornered by truth. It scrambles, it lashes out, it projects. But don't look back. Don't dim your light to soothe their discomfort. You've spent enough time explaining your pain to people who were committed to misunderstanding it. You don't need closure. You need continuation. You don't need their validation. You need your own voice ringing loud and clear through the chambers of your life. This is not your villain era. This is your resurrection. This is your liberation. This is your return to power. And no one gets to shrink that ever again. Not even the ones who loved you most when you were small.